We have one massive problem, and then a secondary pain in the ass. Great that the motor was installed and they bolted up the T56 transmission. I don't know if whoever put it in assumed that there was a drain bung already tapped into the pan, but let me tell you, there isn't. Could you guys imagine buttoning all this car up after all this hard work, and then the first mod that you have to do, well, it's not really a mod, it'd be a band-aid, and it'd be a heater core bypass, because it's exactly what would have happened. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the infamous project. Super windy day here in Texas, so I am indoors, and I want to get a little bit of work done on the Saleen project right here. So if you guys haven't seen the little intro video to the Saleen, to Chuck's 91 GT, and the return of the Calypso notchback, be sure to check that video out. And we're going to make some progress hopefully on this thing today, and it's not going to be fun progress. It's actually really shitty, dreadful process. So I've gone through the crates that belong to this car, most of the parts, not the coilover stuff here because that's some shitbox stuff going on, but over here everything from throttle bodies, EGR plates, Dixon Saleen intakes, all the little hoses and thermostat housings and piping, injectors, all that stuff is here. And we have a whole bunch of hardware over here. We've got the stuff for the Holley Terminator X. We've got our long tubes hiding in here with gaskets and everything else. And a bunch of the piping for the T-trim is in this bin. We got our radiator, we got our fuel pump. We got everything that we need according to the inventory that I've done, except for the fuel rails. Fuel rails haven't been ordered yet, and I was just going and looking at some aeromotive options because we can see he's going for a little bit of a theme here, which is polished. And that'll hopefully finish off the look and everything on the underside there, but we have one massive problem. And then a secondary pain in the ass. Not a problem, but a pain in the ass. So the first problem being the Vortec. We can see there is an oil feed line here, which means it needs an oil feed, which will come off of the sending unit down there, which there is one fitting. So we're gonna have to get a T fitting there so we can run our sending unit and also feed oil to the blower. Now, the issue is the blower requires a drain. And great that the motor was installed and they bolted up the T56 transmission and felt like they were making headway. I don't know if whoever put it in assumed that there was a drain bung already tapped into the pan, but let me tell you, there isn't. And I looked all the way around, hopeful, wishful thinking that I could see a bung, and the bung in reality should be down right there above that weld mark. And well, we do not have one. So what does that mean? That means I need to get this oil pan out. As you guys could imagine, it's one of those things where it's not that it's that difficult. It's tedious, and the problem is just risk and liability. When you have a car that is this clean, and the more you take things in and out, the more chance that you have to scratch, to ding, for an accident to happen, so on and so forth. So yeah, I've been trying to think of what my approach is going to be here, and I'm hoping, and I looked in the back here in the transmission tunnel, the QuickTime bell housing for the T56, which is hiding back there. And we have probably 3-4 inches or so of clearance that I can lift this motor up, and I got to do some measurements on the underside and see if that's going to be enough to snake this pan out. Now, part of me is thinking, yes, if the oil pickup didn't exist, but and the pump, but those things are ultimately going to be there. So then it's like, okay, well, do I drop the K-member? Because the steering shaft actually needs to get disconnected because they did not install this guy right here, brand new Maximum Motorsport one. So this one needs to be installed anyway. So if we disconnect the steering shaft, That's one thing. I do not believe we have any brake fluid at this time. All right, master cylinder is empty. So it'll be very easy to disconnect the brake line that's going to the flex lines in there. We could hold our engine up, could drop the K-member, drop the oil pan. So anyways, let's see what the course of action is going to be. I need to think about this for a minute because it's not going to be a fun job. All right, so after assessing the options and thinking, you know, can I drop the K-member or jack the motor up enough to get the pan to clear, I've decided I'm just gonna pull the motor. There's just too many things to consider, factor in, rolling around on the ground. The reality is I can pretty much unbolt everything that needs to be unbolted here from the top side, with the exception of maybe 2, maybe 3 bolts from the underside. So that's what I'm gonna be doing. Probably gonna remove the bracket with the supercharger off the motor, power steering pump that can stay down with the car. One thing that I will have to be mindful of is the crank pulley, and we'll see. There should be enough room to clear, but we'll be careful no matter what. You see I got my fancy faux Burberry blanket here, you know, luxurious fake blanket. So I'm gonna tackle these bell housing bolts all along the backside here. Hopefully I can get them all loose and off without too much aggravation. And as long as I can get those out, then it'll just be getting the motor mount bolts off. And I'll probably actually do them from the underside block side. And that way there's going to be less risk of scratching the engine cradle and everything else. You know, if I take them out of the main nuts there, it'll just kind of be less stuff to worry about. Again, the less pieces that are moving or in the way that we can keep from potentially scratching or damaging something, the better. So good news, I've got all the bell housing bolts from the top side. They're all out, and it wasn't that hard. I feel like they might have been torqued down a little bit tighter than they should have been, but it's okay. We got them out with my nifty tool. I got to get that ground strap off in the back, and we'll loosen off the motor mounts. Probably do that. I'll see if I can reach them and get them done from the top side here. So one thing that I noticed, I have no idea why they did this. Like, if maybe they were just trying to mock stuff up. There's only a few of the bolts or hardware holding the actual head unit onto the bracket. So I'm actually just gonna pull all of this off because I feel like it needs to come off anyways, because not all of the hardware is holding it on. So this whole side is gonna come off, and that's gonna free up some room for us ultimately, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, focus on the motor mounts, and then from there, I've already got the one starter bolt out from the top side, so I'll be able to get the other one from the underside. I knew it couldn't have been that easy, honestly. Oh, and you know what is making this so difficult? It's the oil pan. I don't know if you can see that down there. I'll grab the flashlight. Hopefully you guys can see that down there. See where the pan is just so ever touching the K-member down there? Well, that's our problem. I can't pull the motor forward anymore to get it off of the bell housing, which ultimately means I need to pull the transmission back some. I do have the jack under the transmission right now, so I'm gonna have to loosen the transmission mount and see if we can slide the transmission back a little bit, so that way we can pull the motor straight up. Motor's out. Going to get it in a position where it's, I'll just let it down some. We'll get the oil pan taken, zipped off real quick. And I'll be able to take it over to my buddy Byron's shop, and he'll be able to TIG weld in a nice return bung on there for us. Then we get to put everything back on and get the motor back in the car. All right guys, motor's out of the car, it's resting there, and got it just so that we don't want to lose any pressure in the hydraulics of the lift. You never know what could happen, so got the underside all wrapped up, making sure that no dust or anything will get towards the internals there. I want to make sure everything stays nice and clean. It's not going to be together, or not together, for very long. Hopefully I'll have this buttoned up by tomorrow. Got the drain line right here, and we'll most likely get that bung placed right in here, out of harm's way. We'll make sure that we have that done properly, so ultimately we can stab this thing back in here. And it wasn't too bad, like I said, just need to be able to make sure that we can get that transmission back far enough just to make our lives a little bit easier, to get the oil pan down, around, and over the hump of the K-member there. You can actually see where they did some trimming for the clearance of the oil pan, and that's pretty common, just to make sure that, you know, it's not hitting once it's installed, let alone when you're trying to install it. But so far so good. No damage, no scratches, no nothing. Taking our time. This is probably, considering nothing was hooked up, I probably could have pulled out 2 motors in the time that it just took me to pull out this one. And that's, again, when you're trying to be careful and making sure that you don't get any scratches or war wounds. It's the last thing you want on a beautiful car like this. So let me go get this welded up. We'll come back, resume, get the motor back in the car, and then the second part, because if you guys remember at the beginning of this video, I told you that there's 2 major headaches. The next headache is going to be the heater core. So you can see that's not looking very healthy whatsoever. Going to order a new copper replacement from NPD, and that also means we need to take out the dash and the center console and drop the column of this beautifully, freshly put back together interior. So that's a little bit of a burn, but it is what it is. So I'm going to say this, and it's not a jab at the guys that did the interior on the car. It's just a general statement. So if you guys that did the interior, because they were a great set of guys when they dropped the car off, you know, it sucks when you go to a shop and the shop doesn't know Foxbodies inside and out. Like, that is just something that you do. If the dash is out, and especially you can tell those pipes are tweaked, and you can pressure test it, you can do whatever you want. The problem is that when cars have been sitting, things haven't been run, there's going to be some deposits built up in there, and the chances are, from those deposits, corrosion, and everything else, it's weakening the metal from the backside. And as soon as coolant starts going through and that heater core starts operating, what's going to happen? It's going to start to leak. And it might not leak in a week, it might not leak in a month, it might not leak in a year. But why wouldn't you do it, knowing that you could easily get another 10, 20 years just by doing that preventative maintenance? So we're going to be taking the dash out, we're going to do the heater core. The evaporator, we could do it as well. Probably will, since we're in there. The evaporators on these cars, they rarely leak. And, you know, sometimes I don't like cutting up the heater boxes, because you have to cut them up in order to get the cores out. But we'll most likely do both. Get those swapped. We'll feel good. We'll know. I'll have peace of mind that all of those components have been changed. And once these two major hurdles are over, we can really focus on getting the car back together. So that's pretty much where this project is at, guys. And time to go get the bung installed and just get over these major hurdles so that way it's just kind of on that nice road or path to success. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy. There's going to be hurdles. There's going to be nuts and bolts missing and parts that aren't fitting properly or God knows what that's going to make me pull out the hair that I don't have. But this is where patience comes into play. And we'll get there. So anyways, hang around. We'll be right back. So I got the oil pan back from Byron's shop, and he did a really nice job in terms of welding on a nice return port. And I've got the plastic off the motor. Most importantly, I extensively cleaned out the oil pan here. So I've spent probably the better part of 15 minutes between spraying. There's, I want to say, gear oil. Smells like gear oil that was in here probably to kind of like keep things lubed up, or maybe it's an assembly lube that smells like a gear oil. I'm not 100% sure. However, it's thick, it was nasty, and when Byron drilled out the port for the bung, it had a lot of debris and everything else. He rinsed some of it out, but it just stuck to that oil. And I just want to make sure that any little traces of metal, dirt, debris, everything was out of there. Brake clean, compressed air, treat it like you're about to paint a car and you don't want any dust in your paint or your clear coat. And similarly, the plastic is off the bottom side of the motor here. I had that all wrapped in plastic just to make sure it was near the floor. And even though it was only, 2 days, that I didn't want any dust or dirt or anything else getting stuck to the oil that was in the motor here. You don't want dirt in your motor. So everything's cleaned up. It is a one-piece gasket in here, the one-piece rubber gasket. So everything looks sealed where it needs to be around the timing cover area and everything else. I'm gonna leave that alone. I am gonna put a little bit of gasket maker just around in these areas here. I'm just gonna smear it here. I'm gonna smear it in the back. And this is, after all, a boosted motor. So any blow by or crankcase pressure that this thing, may see at some point in time, trying to keep it all contained and avoid oil leaks. So be using the right stuff. I'll just be smearing a little bit on, and then I'll go ahead and bolt the pan back on, and I will use a torque wrench and torque down all of the bolts to spec. I need to look it up again. I think it's only about 15 foot-pounds or so. And, I'll probably wait. I got a YouTube live tonight, and I'll wait some time and I'll go around, retorque everything. I feel like oil pan bolts are those, they're almost like header bolts. I feel like they naturally come a little loose on you at times. So I'll go around, retorque everything before I go ahead and stab it back in the car. All right, guys, oil pan's bolted back on. Everything's looking good, torqued everything down. You can see here's our bung. I actually have a threaded fit in here, so we'll be able to get whatever type of adapter we want to work with that. And it'll be more than sufficient. And kind of like using this because you can swap up whatever you want instead of just being a dedicated barbed fitting on the end. So got a little bit of versatility there. And just keep in mind, guys, when you are doing your bung, make sure that it's in between your two oil pan bolts, and that way you can still get a socket on your bolts. Otherwise you might have to get like a wrench in there, and it'd just be challenging if this happened to be right below this. So keep that in mind when you're doing your bungs for your oil returns. But there we go, we're finally ready. Gotta jump on a YouTube live here. I'll recheck all the torque before I put this thing back into the car. I'm gonna wait until I'm rested and I'm motivated. That way, no mistakes will happen when we're trying to put this motor back in the car. And sweating a little bit here, time to get a beer. not sure who puts a shifter in. It doesn't tighten all the bolts, so needless to say, gotta see what I can do here. Like, why? Why? I'm getting it. I'm gonna have to put the camera down though, but you guys get the idea. That's stupid shit. All right, guys, we're back on the Saleen here. You can see we got the doors open. It's time to start removing things to ultimately get at that heater core. And it sucks, but it needs to be done. You can't go through all the work that's been done to this car and leave that liability of a leaking heater core. The last thing you want is a bunch of coolant potentially dripping onto your carpet. So hands are clean, I'm clean, and gonna go through and start taking stuff out. Now, I've done a lot of videos on interior removal and installation, so I'm not gonna go through every single last thing, but I am gonna point out some flaws when I see them. And I just took the caps off of the rear armrest here. And I just need to say this, guys. You can see this looks like a brand new piece of hardware. And you can see how there's a brand new piece of hardware that's broke off in there. Well, let me tell you, on the other side, I think one bolt is in and the other one's half in. Guys, there's different thread pitches on a lot of these bolts. And this goes for your headlights, to the nuts that hold your tail lights on, to, there's just a variety of these 5/16 head style bolts and nuts throughout a Foxbody. Check the thread pitch, because we have a broken one here, and I'm sure that on the other side we're cross-threaded. Oh, I see what they did. Come on, guys. And this is just people that they just don't know any better. They try and do the right thing. You see they put some washers on there to try and pick up the slack. But the reality is we have to run the tap through there. I might have to drill that guy out. They tried their washer trick on there and failed. All right, take this off now. All right, guys, I don't know if you saw what I did there, but you can see I took all of the controls off of the back side of the climate control. And the reason for this is that it'll help you make sure you don't break these clips. These clips on these connectors are so fragile this day and age. Got a bunch of dust here. We'll do a little bit of cleanup here. So again, these clips become so fragile, it's easier just to pull them off the back side of the climate control. Then you can kind of just tuck them in out of the way. And then we'll be able to pull this center console out once I get hardware off on the driver's side here. Fresh out of the box, and I knew exactly, like I just knew that something was going to be wrong. So you see how these outlets, or inlet and outlet, are bent? So this one's completely cocked over, and that means that somebody, probably when they were trying to take the factory hoses off, had a lot of pressure and twisting and pulling and prying, which if the hoses aren't coming off easily, cut them off, guys. It's easier to cut the hoses, replace the hoses, than have to pull this heater box out, pull all of your dash and center console out, just so that you end up having to change this. Now, upon closer inspection, see this support tab right here? That's supposed to be soldered on to the housing. So that is snapped off. And look at here. Tear right in the metal. And again, I bet you somebody had, look at this. I'm barely even putting pressure. See how fatigued that is? And that's what happens, is that, you know, especially if people, guys, if you're just running water in your cooling system, it's going to allow for corrosion within. And this is where, like, this was leaking. This all along here, all this green, that's what happens when water hits copper or brass, and it does this weird green oxidization thing. So yeah, needless to say, this core was bad. And, you know, when I called the guys out on it, like, oh, you know, why didn't you replace the heater core while you refurbished the whole interior? They said they pressure tested this. There's no way this passed a pressure test. So I'm sorry, guys, but this should have been changed. All right, so some good success there. You know, less than an hour pulling all that stuff out. And it's trying to take my time, be careful, because again, this is all a freshly restored interior. Everything's been re-dyed and touched up and, you know, put back together real nice. So of course, to pull it all apart is a little saddening. It's sort of like a little opportunity to find a couple gremlins and correct some things that we found, sort of like the armrest bolts in the back. Gonna have to drill that one out. We'll re-tap that, get the proper bolts and hardware in there. Found some of the radio harness that was tucked up in and out of the way. So probably rewrap and clean a little bit of that up. Some things could be wiped down a little bit more. And why not, while everything is out, right? I'll check with the customer and see if he's okay with me doing my little kill mat tricks here and there. And now that the gauge cluster and climate controls are out, maybe it's an opportunity to convert them over to LED bulbs. So I'll ask him if he wants to do that. And most importantly, we're gonna get this heater core changed. So the question ultimately here lies, do we need to change the evaporator core as well? I would almost say, no, we don't. You know, I'll peek through here and see how, you know, the fittings look there. If they all look fine, honestly, guys, the evaporator cores, they're not very common to go in these cars. They can go, but the question is going to be, does he want me cutting this open to be able to get that evaporator core out? And we'll see whether he says yes or no. We'll make the decision from there. Again, when you're dealing with a specialty car, such as a Saleen like this, and you're trying to do restoration, even though sometimes things are better, you know, that you would think, sometimes there's value in the originality and, you know, leaving the creaks and rattles and all of those things that come with a Foxbody. So we'll see what he wants to do. We'll check back in, but these were the two most tedious tasks, was pulling the motor out just to get that oil pan tapped for the oil drain return off the blower. And then of course, getting this heater core out. Like, could you guys imagine buttoning all this car up after all this hard work? And then the first mod that you have to do, well, it's not really a mod, it'd be a Band-Aid, and it'd be a heater core bypass, because it's exactly what would have happened. We filled this thing up with coolant, cranked it up, first cycle that all that coolant starts going through, a bit of pressure in the system, coolant would have been dripping down on the carpet on the inside of the car, right from that broken connection point of the inlet on the heater core. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. There's lots more to come. We'll jam the new heater core, maybe evaporator core in here, do some cleanup, touch-ups, get everything back together. I actually have to pull the Holley harness back through the firewall. I don't know why they routed it all through that hole without having the grommet first. That's kind of another big question mark to me, but we'll get that sorted out and figure out where they've got things hiding down in here as well. I'm assuming maybe it's underneath the passenger seat, but I'll do some investigation. So we have all of these things sitting right here on these bins and on that table that all need to get installed next, so stay tuned.